Seems like every time you turn on the news, you get to hear people debating words like deficit spending, saving, spending, inflation, what does it all mean, socialism, capitalism. So I thought I'd explain what I call Godonomics. I'm Chad Hovind. We spent some time over the last few years really studying what does God have to say about economy. What does it have to say about a personal economy, a family economy, and even a national economy. But of course, we don't want to take ourselves too seriously, so I have a turkey here. Because in this session, we're going to talk about what did God say to Adam Smith. But before we talk about Adam Smith, I need to go back to the first Thanksgiving. At that first Thanksgiving, William Bradford, who would eventually become the governor, took some pilgrims over to experience freedom, a new land, a new opportunity. And on his way over, there was a charter by the group that sent him, and that charter said that they had to conduct this new society in a certain way, a socialistic way. Everybody was to work for the common good. Take the money, take their goods, and pour them into one central pot, and then from that pot, everybody's needs would be taken care of. Or so they said. See, it always sounds nice until you try and do it, and that's exactly what William Bradford found. That first year was tragic. In that first year, what happened was William Bradford lost his wife, and many others died of disease. But more tragic was that many died from poverty. That first year, when everyone was supposed to be working for the common good, a lot of people were tired, getting up a little late. Some people, I just don't feel like going to work. Well, I'll have somebody else take care of it. At the end of the year, half the pilgrims had died. And yes, the pilgrims did not have big buckles on their heads. We're talking about real people who are really trying to make a brand new life. So William Bradford called them together. Okay, guys, all right, we really got to work hard. Half of our people died. We got to really work hard for the common good. So do better. Okay. Well, sure enough, the next year, same thing happened. People were lazy. People were too tired. People thought, well, somebody else will take care of me. At the end of the year, another poverty, starvation. The whole pilgrim experiment was falling apart. And William Bradford said, we got to go back to the Scripture. What are God's principles to this circumstance? And he went back and studied the Scriptures, and he found himself actually in the Old Testament. And he noticed that God talked about, when he brought his people into freedom, property. Remember the Ten Commandments? You shall not steal or envy your neighbor's horse, your neighbor's donkey, your neighbor's house. He said, well, this is different. This isn't a common pool. This is the idea that each person owns their own thing, works their own thing. You shouldn't steal or envy somebody else's thing. It was property rights. He said, why don't we try God's wisdom applied to this? He called everybody together and says, this has failed. Let's try something new. Everybody gets a plot of land. This family's a plot of land. This family's a plot of land. Here's your job. You work your plot of land. You provide for yourself. And you have the incentive to get the work done. And if you don't get the work done, you're going to starve. Well, all of a sudden, something amazing happened. People who were sick, whoa, they're out there in the field. Husbands, wives, kids, they were together working their farm. They were together planting the seeds, seeing the work of their labor. And you know what happened at the end of that year? At the end of that year, William Bradford called everyone together and said, we have such bounty, we have such incredible prosperity, that's why he celebrated with the first Thanksgiving. To celebrate the incredible prosperity that occurred when property rights, incentive, and freedom were put into motion. He wrote in his journal that he wanted those of us who came after him to learn from their mistakes. He said, rather than on Thanksgiving eating a turkey, you might be a turkey if you don't follow our example. And yet here we are, hundreds of years later, still experimenting with socialism. And yet time and time and time again it's failed. The problem, I think, is that capitalism has a bad name because it becomes whatever you define it to be. So let me tell you what capitalism really means. It's about three things. Property rights. That's the foundation of capitalism. Number two, freedom. Free workforce. You have the freedom to choose to work or not work for somebody, to choose what labor you will or what payroll you will or will not work for. And number three is incentive. Because I can choose to work for you, there's incentive. I'm going to get this blessing out of it. I'm going to get this crop out of it. There's an incentive. That's what capitalism is. Freedom, incentive, and property rights. So how does that play out to Adam Smith? Well, Adam Smith is known as the father of modern capitalism. So what would God say to Adam Smith? Well, I think when you take a look at the guy, it's obvious. God would say, who's your barber? Who does your hair? I think God might say, why is it that everybody wore those white wigs back then? But what you may not know is that Adam Smith was a follower of Christ. And he wrote 2 books. His third book, Wealth of Nations, was the book where he applied God's principles to economy. And it changed everything. Let me take you back to the 1700s. Prior to 1780, 4/5 of the French expended 90% of their income on food. So you think how much money you spend, whether it's on vacations or whether it's on TV or whether it's on internet. Imagine 90% of your income had to go just to sustain yourself. That's what was going on in 1780 in France. In Germany in 1780, there was less than 1,000 people making $1,000 or more in the whole country. And then in 1776, Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, where he took God's principle and began to apply it to economics. And it changed everything. In fact, the reformers, after the Protestant Reformation, Christ followers said, why don't we more and more go back to what God said and try and play that out in our lives? And that's what they did. And this wave of prosperity began to just swarm across the entire continent of Europe and then come over to the New World. And here's what happened. Between 1800 and 1850, wages quadrupled. Between 1850 and 1900, they quadrupled again. That was 16 times more prosperity in only 1 century. Why? Because when you apply God's principles, great things happen. And when you try and work around and use your own wisdom, things go the other direction. So what does God want for us? Well, 3 things. God wants us each to experience liberty, inner liberty, external liberty, prosperity, and generosity. 3 things. We'll talk about that in all 6 sessions. Liberty, prosperity, and generosity. Now, what does that mean? Well, I want to start by talking about 2 gifts that God wants to give us if we're going to experience this. The gift of work and the gift of profit. Did he say profit? Profit's a bad word, isn't it? That can't be a gift from God. I mean, think about the alternative to having profit. Well, I'd like to work really hard. I'd like to start a business so one day I can go bankrupt. No, profit is a good thing. It's a gift from God. And we'll explain that in a moment. But let's begin by opening the gift of work. Let's go back to Adam and Eve. When God created the original creation, He put man in it. And in Genesis 2:15, He says, lay around and do nothing. No. He says, I want to put you in the garden to dress it and to keep it, to work it. Adam, Eve, I've given you talents, I've given you skills, and I've given you opportunity. I've created a world with incredible ways in which you can partner with me in my creation. That's what work is. In fact, the idea of the Protestant work ethic comes from those reformers and Christ followers beyond who said, what if we really took work, not as part of the curse, but part of God's original mandate? And that's what happened. In fact, there's 2 aspects to the gift of work. Number 1 is an idea that I work for God, not for my boss. And number 2 is I work for self-sufficiency. We talk about working for God. Paul took this idea from the Old Testament and said, what if I looked at work as truly a joy, truly a gift from God? What if I began to think about not working for my company, not working for my employer? What if I thought about this as a chance to serve God? And here's how he says it in Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do it heartily, not lazily, heartily, as if you're working for the Lord, not unto men, knowing that of the Lord you will receive the reward of your inheritance. What's he talking about? Reward. There is an incentive to you serving. Don't do hard work only because there's a camera in the corner or somebody's looking over your shoulder. Work because you should think about this opportunity in your business, in your organization, in your career as a chance to serve God in the big things and be faithful in the little things. And know this, he said. He said that you will receive an inheritance from God. God will reward us for our labor. He will reward us for our faithfulness. Even when other people aren't noticing, God writes it down. Even Fidel Castro, not a Christian. Even Fidel Castro, not a capitalist. Even he noted it. In James Candy's book, What If Jesus Was Never Born? He noted that Fidel Castro's come over several times and said, there's something different about those Christ followers. They don't cheat the system. They do work hard. We don't have to always have supervisors watching over them. They really are hard workers. There's something different about them. See, as Christ followers, if we really took the gift of work and played it out, it would impact those who don't even believe the way we do. It would be light in the darkness if we took this gift of work and opened it and worked unto God. Contrast that with a friend of mine. He came up to me and said, Chad, have you ever seen the Christian fish in the Yellow Pages? I said, yeah, I've seen that before. He said, you know what that means? I said, I sure do. It's the ichthus. And I went through the whole history of what the ichthus came from. He said, no, that's not what it means. I said, what does it mean? He said, when you see the Christian fish in the yellow pages, it means you're about to get ripped off. I said, what are you talking about? He's like, I have hired so many Christian fish people who just ripped me off. I'm sick of it. And I thought, what a tragedy that people who bear the mark of Christ, if you want to call a fish a mark of Christ, but call themselves followers of Christ, are not opening this gift and working into the Lord. They're lazy. And they're shaming not only our Lord, but they're also shaming a world that's watching us. And that is why Paul says this gift means working for God, but it also means working for self-sufficiency. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, here's what Paul says again in Galatians. He says, work for self-sufficiency, to be able to provide for yourself, to meet your own needs. He says it this way, but let each one examine his own work, and then he will have rejoicing in himself alone, and not in another. For each one shall bear his own load. Examine your work, rejoice in your work, bear your own load. Provide for yourself. This is important. Work for self-sufficiency. The word load actually was a backpack the Romans used to wear at that time. And he said each person needs to carry their own load. And when you take somebody else's load, which they could and should be carrying, and you take it away from them, you enable them, you're robbing them of the joy of serving God. You're robbing them of the joy of seeing the fruit of their own labor, examining their own work, rejoicing in their work. And all in the name of compassion, you might be actually crippling them psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually. Which is why Paul's so clear. Each person needs to bear their own load. Each person needs to work for self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency, Chad, that sounds like selfishness. That can't be God talk. That can't be Jesus talk. What do you mean by that? Well, Adam Smith picks up on this idea, and here's how Adam Smith says it. He says, it is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own self-interest. We address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love, and never talk to them of our own necessities, but of their advantages. Well, what does all that mean? Remember, Jesus said, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. The second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. He presumes that we love ourselves. We want to look out for what's best for ourselves. I don't have trouble looking out for myself. The problem is when I don't take that same concept and apply it to other people's needs. Well, Adam says people are going to look out for incentive. They're going to look out for themselves. Well, again, Chad, this sounds selfish. Well, actually, it's the opposite. If you're capable of work and God's giving you opportunities and talents and skills, but you don't do that work, instead you want other people to provide for your food and your clothing and your things when you should or could be working, that's selfishness. Because you're saying, I'd rather have somebody else do all the work. Paul addresses this so clearly in one of the most unpreached passages of the Bible. Here's how he says it. He says in Thessalonians, for yourselves know that you ought to follow us, follow our example. When we were with you, we did not eat anybody else's bread for naught. Property rights, what's he saying? We came, and there was bread, but that bread around the table, somebody else had worked for, somebody else had paid for. It was their bread. We didn't come in and expect to eat other people's bread, but instead, with labor and travail, night and day, we worked. We worked to make ourselves an example to you to follow us. For even when we were with you, we commanded you that, here it comes, wait for it, if you don't work, you shouldn't eat. What? Who's that hate monger? It's Paul. Paul is saying that when you take the incentive away, and people say, well, I got all my needs taken care of, even though I can be lazy all day. When you take away their incentive, they're just going to let somebody else take care of their needs. So Paul says, here's a principle you need to apply. If people who are willing to work and able to work don't work, then they don't eat. Take away the incentive, and they're going to suddenly be motivated, just like William Bradford found. But he continues, and here's what he says. Paul says, we hear there are some among you who are disorderly. That sounds bad. Disorderly people. Paul says, let me tell you what disorderly people are. They're not working at all. They're lazy. They're busybodies. Well, are they lazy or busybodies? Well, they're busy gossiping and doing all kinds of other things because they're not doing the real thing. They're not working. One of my favorite quotes from G.K. Chesterton. He said, when children grow tired in the mid-afternoon, they turn to torturing the cat. Which is what? When we don't have anything productive to do, we get ourselves into trouble. And Paul says, especially when God has things for us to do. This is the incentive. In fact, 2 books I'd like to recommend that are great. How the Scots Invented the Modern World, which traces the history of Adam Smith. And 2, and this is a great book, The Victory of Reason, How Christianity Led to Freedom, Capitalism, and Western Success, by Rodney Stark. Fantastic book. Let's talk about the gift of profit. There's a gift of work and there's a gift of profit. Incentive. It's a good thing. In fact, several years ago, I was noticing in the New Testament how often Jesus references incentive. When you're being persecuted, remember, great is your reward in heaven. Reward. God will reward you 10 times, 20 times, even 100-fold for your obedience in this world. Paul shows up and he pulls back in the Old Testament and says, hey, you should pay those fairly, because even when you have an ox, you don't muzzle an ox when he's treading. Thank you, Paul, for that clarity. What does that mean? He was saying when you had an ox in those days and the ox was cutting the plow, you wouldn't put a muzzle on him. He'd be allowed to eat the fruit of his labor. And he applied that to ministry and business, to allowing people to enjoy the fruit of their labor. So what is the gift of profit? What's the second gift we want to open? The gift of profit. Let's talk what that means. Well, this is what I'm calling Godonomics. This is what Adam Smith referred to as the invisible hand of the market. Free markets have a way of forcing people to do the right thing, in that you're forced as a businessman to focus on the needs of others. Here's what I mean. Godonomics begins with producing. I produce a good or a service. And I'm producing a good and service in hopes of having the incentive of a reward, profit. Producing leads to profiting. But how am I going to profit from my production? I'm going to have to focus on my customers' needs. Because if they don't like the quality or the value of my product, they're not going to buy it, and I'm going to go out of business. The Puritans called this idea the common grace God gave. In that, in order to profit with my incentive, I have to focus on other people's needs so they'll buy my product. Producing leads to profiting. Profiting leads to savings. Now, what is savings and what is profit? It's when I make more than it costs me to produce. And when I make more than it costs me to produce, I have savings. What does the savings do? Savings allows me to do some great things. Savings means I have enough money not only to take care of my needs, but to also give. Because I've taken care of my needs, I now have more money than I needed to give to the poor, to give to the needy. I also have enough money I've made from my profit and my savings to invest in more jobs, more opportunities. And also, one of the great things about producing and profiting and savings is I can also do some spending and enjoy the incredible things that God's given to us. And maybe you're thinking to yourself, I didn't hear any Bible verses in there, Chad. This is great, because this whole concept is played out for us in Proverbs 31. God says, I want to show you how business works. And the Proverbs 31 woman does exactly what we just described here. Here's what it says. The first thing she does is she considers a field and buys it. What is she doing? She considers whether or not this field, this vineyard she's going to purchase, will this produce enough grapes that I will make a profit? She considers it. Is this good? Is this a good deal? Will it do it? And then she buys it. And from her profits, from the fruit of her labors, she makes enough money that she's able to perceive that her merchandise is good. She says to herself, the fruits, the merchandise that's coming out is good. I would buy it at this price and this quality. And I know my customers would buy it at this price and this quality. So she works hard. It says her lamp does not go out day or night. She does not eat the bread of idleness. She then extends her hand to the poor. What does she do? It says it a different way. She reaches out her hands to the needy. Twice it mentions. She produced, she profited, she had enough savings that she was able to give to the needy and the poor. This is why God wants us to experience liberty and prosperity. Poor people can't even provide for their own needs, let alone somebody else's. Prosperity means I can meet my own needs and then have enough left over to take care of people who can't meet their own. But notice what else she does. Because she was able to, from her profit, she buys another field, another vineyard. She says, this vineyard did so well, it made so much profit, I'm going to take the profits from that and buy another field. I'm going to invest in another field, which provides more jobs for more people and more profits and more savings. See how the arrows go in this direction? The more you focus on others, the more you're able to keep blessing others. I love how it ends, because it says, give her the fruit of her hands, or the fruit of her labor. And that's the incentive. Why would people risk? Why would people work hard? It's for the incentive. I want to see the fruit of my labor. I want to see the blessings I can be to others. I want to be able to spend some of my money, invest some of my money, and give some of my money. This is how real jobs are created. Somebody produces, profits, saves, and they make enough money that they can invest in a new business, in a new venture, a new organization, a new gimmick, and a new gadget. That's how it works. And that's what we find from the Proverbs 31 woman. She spells out how Godonomics works. So how do we apply this today? Well, it's actually one simple principle. And the principle is this: treat people fairly, not equally. Well, don't those mean the same thing? Not at all. See, when you treat people equally, it means whether somebody's lazy or hardworking, they get the same reward. It's not what Proverbs said. It said, give each person the fruit of their labor. Reward people or treat people fairly. If somebody works harder, give them more. If somebody works less, give them less of the fruit of their labor. Give an example. Economics professor. He shows up one day and he has a class, a new freshman came in, and he's arguing about whether or not socialism or capitalism works. And he says it doesn't work. Socialism has never worked. There's no history of it working. But his students have been so brainwashed. They're like, yes, it works. It's the compassionate thing to do. It's the kind thing to do. He's just exhausted. Fine. He waits for the first test. First test comes in, and some students work really, really hard and study, and they get A's. Some get B's. Some goof off all the time. They didn't study the night before, and they get D's and F's. Comes time to pass out the papers, and everybody gets a C+. A C+? The A and the B students are like, why did I get a C+? I've never had a C in my life. Well, the good news is you worked so hard that you brought the group up to a C+, because there were some D's and F's in the group. Thank goodness for your hard work. Thank goodness for my hard work. I worked all this and I got a C+. Next test came along. Guess what happened? The A and B students said, if I'm just going to be graded down to the lowest common standard, I won't work as hard. So now they came back and they got B's and C's. Well, the guys who didn't do anything last time and got rewarded for their laziness said, work last time, work for me. So sure enough, they show up, and now the grades go down from a C+ average to a D-. See, that's what socialism does. When you take the incentive away from the producers, they lose their incentive, they lose their motivation, and it's a downward spiral into poverty. I'll give you a practical example. I started making balloons when I was a kid, but recently I have a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, and we've been starting our own little balloon business. So we got a performing license to go down in Cincinnati to this little area. My son, who's 10, his job is to inflate the balloons. So he inflates the balloons, but he's 10. He sort of inflates a couple, goofs off a little bit, inflates a few, goofs off. My daughter, who's 12, she takes it pretty seriously. She listens to the kids, hey, what do you like? And she makes a lot of balloons. It might be a turkey or a dog or a horse. And my job is to buy all the material, drive us all down there, and I do magic or juggling to illusions to draw people in, so then she can sell them the balloons or get the donations. So we get done, and that day, for 2 hours, we made $33. I'm going to keep my day job. But the kids were thrilled. They're like, oh, wow, $33. We worked hard. See, they got to enjoy the fruit of their labor. I said, well, how do you think we should divvy up the profits? And they said, well, let's split it equally. 11, 11, 11. I said, well, hold on. Did we all do equal work? Well, yeah. My daughter's like, no, Javen didn't. He was goofing off the whole time. No, I'm glad we're talking about this. She's sort of my, justice girl. And Javen's like, oh, I think we should all give it fairly. We all came down here. I said, we want to pay each other fairly, but that doesn't mean equally. I said, Javen, you did goof off a lot, didn't you? Yeah, but still, I think we should give you $9. I think that would be fair, but not equal. And we had to talk about it a while. He's like, that is fair. My daughter, we gave 11, and I said, I'll take 13. 13? I said, yeah, I'll take 13. And so we talked about it and said, that is the fair thing to do. I said, now, we've talked about it. Here's my $13. The balloons cost me 10, and parking cost me 3. Oh. You see, the business owner who puts the time and energy and capital into producing a business, you don't get to see all that sweat equity that goes into it. It looked like I'd made so much more than them, and yet the reward was actually far smaller. Now, I'm a dad, and I was thrilled to do it, and I'll continue to be. But this is what's so important that we need to understand as Christ followers, to pay each other fairly, not equally. And this is really key. In fact, Adam Smith picks up on this idea. And here's something that it's just almost amazing that he wrote in the 1700s. He wrote this, and it could be in today's newspapers and be like, wow, he knows exactly what's going on. But here's what Adam Smith's going to say. He's going to say that these principles of liberty, incentive, and prosperity are such a motivating factor that they can overcome any other obstacle. Here's how he says it. Again, keep in mind, this is written in the 1700s. He says, the natural effort of every individual to better his own condition is so powerful a principle that it is alone capable of carrying a society to wealth and prosperity. Freedom. It'll surmount 100 obstacles with which the folly of human laws too often encumbers its operation. The drive for greater government regulation is the drive toward increased poverty, unemployment, and the loss of liberty. 1700. He said, you can look at the history books. Regulation, government intervention, it sounds nice. It does sound nice. It sounds like a good idea. He says, but every time you apply it, you find something. Human beings are sinful. And whether the government's regulating, whoever is regulating is sinful. And they're always going to spin and twist everything around